Welcome and thank you for your company at today's presentation. We appreciate you taking the time out of your day to listen, and we sincerely hope that we're going to make it worth your while. Just so that you know, we have muted microphones and turned the cameras off so that everybody can have a good experience. So my name is Ed Reed-Cutting and I head up the Brussels office of the Fry Group. I've been a financial planner for 30 years and I'm passionate about helping clients reach their objectives. Now, our office is based in Montgomery on the east of Brussels, where a large proportion of what we do is looking after our clients' wealth with the aim of not only helping them to grow their assets or provide retirement income, but also to help them reduce both tax and administration. The other area in which our office in Belgium operates is in both local and international pensions. In Belgium, we're a small team of 10, and if you want more information about this after the presentation, then you may well be contacted by one of my colleagues, Katie, Sean, or Amanda. And as you'll know from the invitation, I'm joined today by our guest speaker, David Denton of Quilter International. And I've known David for many years, and he's previously spoken in Brussels with us on this subject at the Press Club, just opposite the European Council building on Rue Froissart, close to Schumann. So just before we start, a couple of housekeeping notes. Firstly, a copy of the slides will be made available and potentially technology allowing a recording of this webinar. Most of you will have our contact details, but for those that haven't, they will be displayed at the end where you'll see our email address. I'd also like to point out that there is a Q&A button, and we'd really like it as we go along that if you want to ask questions, we'll try and pick those up and answer as many as we can at the end. Now, I know that some of you will be familiar with the Fry Group, but for those that aren't, I'm just going to give you a very short introduction before we start. So the Fry Group was established more than 120 years ago, and we've been in Belgium for over 25 of those years. And since then, as a group, we've helped thousands of people around the globe and across the generations. And today, we've got 8 offices around the world, so we can offer a truly global perspective. Our service covers 3 core areas of financial planning, which is tax, estates and investments. And our teams work together across these areas and across countries to create the right balance for each client. Our core purpose is to create financial freedom for our clients. And we do understand that financial freedom as a concept means different things to different people. So we take time to try and find out what's important to you so that we can structure your finances around your goals. And of course, we understand there's many threads to this operation, but I hope that just that summary gives you a good sense of who we are and what we do. So now on to the main event. 1996. Why 1996? Well, actually, that was the year that I moved to Belgium. And just to put it into context, Motorola had just launched the new light mobile phone. Fed fund rates finished the year at 7.8%. So that's the US central bank interest rates. And of course, it was pre the euro and pre the central market. So we had currencies such as the Belgian franc. Now, the term branch 21, as opposed to what we're going to talk about today, which is namely branch 23, the term branch 21 was very well known. So remember, before the euro, Belgium was setting its own interest rates, and these were at 5%. And so the branch 21 insurance contract, which had a guaranteed return linked to that interest rate on Belgian francs, was really the mainstay of the local insurance investment world, particularly for Belgians who tended to be and actually remain relatively conservative investors by nature. The other thing about the branch 21 contract is that if you had an 8-year and 1-day term for a branch 21 insurance contract, all the returns were tax-free. But there were 3 important pressures at play here. Firstly, many non-Belgians, and let's call them expats, were not happy with the low risk, low return products. Secondly, many of these expats weren't really interested in investing using the Belgian franc as a currency. And after 2000, if you remember, we had the dot-com bubble and then it burst. So after 2000, interest rates plummeted. But the good news was that Belgium rather unknowingly provided an alternative. It wasn't really common practice, but this was a non-guaranteed variable return insurance product which was governed by law and classed as a branch 23. So branch 23 is just a name for an insurance product. In my world, it's also referred to as an insurance bond or an insurance wrapper. And as you'll hear later today from David, in effect, this insurance product wraps a portfolio of investment assets. Now, I've moved to Belgium from Hong Kong, where I've been working as a financial planner, and we've been using very, very similar structures for tax planning on a daily basis. So effectively, we were 2 steps ahead of the game. And what we discovered was that for branch 23 insurance contracts, there was firstly no tax even after day 1. And whilst these products weren't common in Belgium, they were outside Belgium, and we found out that there was no discrimination in the law between domestic and non-domestic insurers. And indeed, neighbouring Luxembourg, very much reliant at that point, and still is, on its banking and fund administration business, was also a home to a number of insurance companies that were eyeing up Belgium as a market. So I've said no tax. So on that basis, what sort of tax might you be saving? So I'm hoping here that we're going to get a poll that's going to arrive on the screen. Here we go. The question for you I have is, do you know the rate of dividend tax that you would pay in Belgium? So if you were paid a tax by one of your investments, either in Belgium or outside of Belgium, how much dividend tax are you likely to pay? Okay, I can see the numbers coming in. Okay, so that's quite interesting. We've got, the majority of you know this, we've got 3% who think it's at 10%. We've got close to 20% who think it's at 20%, but the correct answer, the vast majority of you got this, it is 30%. So I'll just move that off there. So dividend tax is one of the tax that you might be saving. What else? And David's going to cover this in detail, but just in a nutshell, there's stock exchange tax and the reporting that goes with it, which actually can be quite complex. Dividend tax we've mentioned, and capital gains tax. So I've mentioned Luxembourg as a centre for insurance. It was early in the 2000s that the same thing happened from the International Financial Services Centre in Dublin, where some of the more Anglophile businesses focused a little more on service, but particularly on driving down costs, and as you're about to hear so much more, started to enter into the market. One of these Dublin-based firms is Quilter International, for whom David Denton, our guest speaker today, works. As I've said, David's previously presented in Brussels. And as we know, Belgian tax can be anything but straightforward, but I hope today, for some of you who are interested in investing, we can take some of the complexities and the costs away and make this presentation very much worth your while. David, I'd like to hand over to you.
Thanks, Ed, and good day to you all. I have the pleasure in the next 20 minutes to share some thoughts with you that I've put together, having spent now 30 years in international financial services and 21 of those years with the Quilter International business. I do need to start off with a slightly dull statement. I'm based here in the UK, where I'm qualified and regulated, And as such, I can give you generic and factual information, but Ed and his colleagues in Fry's, they are there to provide the advice that you might require. A few words about the business itself, and you can see some of the details on the screen. We are in fact a founding member of the London Stock Exchange. Our history goes back to 1777, and the international business, Quilter International, has a history of 35 years. Now, in that period of time, we do business with clients in 40 countries, but because of global mobility during the intervening period, we now have clients in more than 100 countries worldwide. We work principally, therefore, with clients who are outside their home country, or who plan to be at a later date in their lives, or who family member might inherit in a different location as well. Alternatively, we provide solutions for some clients who are in their home country, but their wealth is overseas. If we go back several decades, investors very much had a home country bias. Their wealth was in their home country. Investing internationally can provide opportunity, but problems as well. And given that the US market represents over 50% of the world market today, it's difficult not to invest overseas. Now, there is some method in my madness of showing this rather grey picture of the London skyline. And I'd like to indicate that the photographer at the time was standing with her back against the Tate Modern Art Gallery. They're looking north, of course, across the Thames River. We can see the Millennium, the Wobbly Bridge. To the left of it below, the iconic City of London School. And then probably the most well-known skyline includes St. Paul's Cathedral. Now, immediately to right of that and below it is the headquarters I'd be sitting in today to deliver the presentation if we weren't suffering the difficulties in transport associated with COVID-19. But the important aspect there, I believe, is to indicate we're a very substantial part of the London financial services marketplace. Now, the propositions we offer to our clients, particularly in Europe, are typically grown out of Dublin. And you'll see the credentials associated with that location on the screen now. But really importantly, Dublin allows non-local investors to enjoy effectively what's called a gross roll-up of their investments. In other words, any investments roll up without the deduction of further taxes. And that's really important if you're an investor living in a country where tax isn't payable or is payable at a lower rate than otherwise be chargeable to tax in a country where your investments sit, or if there isn't a double taxation agreement. I'm going to move on by offering you a quotation. This gentleman, Max Baucus, not terribly well known in the UK, is a former chair of the US Senate Finance Committee. He very famously once said that tax complexity itself is a kind of tax. So complexity leads to confusion and inactivity. When people generally look at things and find them difficult, they tend to put those things to consider behind, and they never come to the front. And he was indicating that many people pay more taxes than they should, simply because the opportunities are poorly understood. Now, what flows from that, if you're an expat from the UK, is that the UK tax code is actually the second longest tax code in the world. If we measure it through Toddy's, the unofficial tax guide, it's 17 times the size of the King James Bible, both Old and New Testament. And it's very clear that one's wealth is determined not just how quickly we earn it or how well we invest when we save, it's how it's eroded according to the taxes that we pay. Now, this boat is a representation of something that was launched some 20 years ago. 20 years ago, a business called Residencia floated a boat called the World. It was marketed as Sail the World. It was a private yacht with 165 separate apartments. They were all luxury. It was more expensive than Tokyo, than London, and than New York. And the idea behind it was that should you wish to save tax, one would move onto the boat, which would never sail into territorial waters anywhere in the world, and one would be nomadic in terms of their taxation liabilities. And for just a few seconds, to me, that sounds rather attractive, but in reality, it could be rather a bind, and not least because it was predominantly marketed to those from the US. And for those people with US citizenship, their liability follows that citizenship, irrespective of where they are in the world. Now, I'm sure for most people listening in today, they recognize that they are potentially in a different country from where they first started, or will move on again. And therefore, understanding some of the nuances situated around these situations is really important. So we really need to understand before the basic planning starts, what is our tax residency? In other words, where will we be taxed and when will this change? And for those clients where domicile is an issue, domicile is a separate concept that's different from your nationality and it's different from your citizenship. So lots of things come into the mix before a good financial plan can be put together. Very frequently, because of my English accent, I'm asked by people, how long can I spend in the UK without becoming a UK tax resident? Now, there are two extremes here. If I'm resident in the UK for more than 183 days a year, I'll definitely be a UK tax resident. But actually, I might only be able to spend 15 nights in the UK, and without knowing anything about that person's history in the past 3 tax years and their connections and ties with the UK, it might be as low as that. And of course, there's a whole swathe of time between 15 nights and 183 days, which may apply to other people. So the rules pertaining to the country that you're situated in or will be in the future are highly important from a planning perspective. So I'm going to make the suggestion now that most people have, aspire to have, or would like more of property, pensions, and investments. And in reality, what you have to spend in your retirement or to pass on to your loved ones is not just your investments plus or minus growth. It's your investments plus or minus growth after tax. And our investments are indeed our property and our pensions. Now, in the interest of time today, I'm going to make very little comment about property, other than that it can be complicated. Property has what's called a fixed situs. You know where it sits. It's geographically there. That can't easily be changed by placing it inside a company or a trust structure. And governments increasingly willing to collect tax more appropriately will tax property often very heavily. However, when it comes to pensions, things are perhaps a little bit more interesting. Ed mentioned in his introduction, there's a great deal that they think about in terms of financial planning with pensions. I have a couple of slides on the subject today, and here I'm going to give you my executive summary. And tongue-in-cheek, I would suggest that there are only 3 things you need to know about pensions. Start early, save more, and don't rely on the state. But because pensions are complicated, it really is an area where one rarely gets the best. This gentleman, Andy Haldane, who remains today the chief economist of the Bank of England, said in 2016 that, I though consider myself moderately financially literate, yet I confess to being able to not make the remotest sense of pensions. And that's perhaps hardly surprising because the numerous changes over the years. And if you own a UK pension and you're living overseas, it's equally appropriate that you understand your rights and entitlements for that pension overseas as that pension in the country that you're living in today. And just to give you an indication, until 2015, a UK pension was normally paid out in a very fixed manner, often at a predetermined time. Today, after 2015, if your pension pot is represented by a sum of money rather than a predetermined finite amount paid through what's called a defined benefit scheme, that can be accessed all in one go above the age of 55, which for some can bring some remarkable benefits, but for others can be a remarkable tax trap. Also at the time, we lost something that had a rather strange name. And you may be familiar, the highest rate of income tax in the UK is currently 45%. But the special lump sum death benefit charge, well, that applied at a rate of 55% before one passed on their pension to their loved ones if they died above the age of 75 or pre-75 in retirement. So understanding some of the obligations and possibilities and whether an existing scheme should be transferred is a fundamental part of financial planning. However, it's not the subject matter of today, and Ed's already indicated that Branch 23 is an insurance-based arrangement that can be used by Belgian investors to modify the tax consequences of their investment actions. It's a very popular facility. We look, when we produce our solutions around the world, to understand where insurance fits. Now, I'm not going to talk much about the other important aspect of your investments, because risk diversification and currency, of course, are really, really important. But I'm always reminded of the words of a gentleman recently deceased by the name of Harry Markowitz. Now, some 50 years ago, Harry Markowitz wrote a theory in 400 pages. The theory has lastly become known as modern portfolio theory. And those 400 pages won Harry Markowitz the Nobel Prize for Economics a few years later. And his theory is embedded in every fund manager and investment advisor's view on how to manage money. And I'm pleased to be able to summarize those 400 pages in 9 simple words. They are effectively, don't put all your eggs in one basket. But the fact is, how one chooses those eggs and blends those eggs to make an omelette is really the craft that is so substantially important, but beyond the scope of the conversation today. What I'm focusing on is how we retain more of that wealth for longer as it grows. So I'm going to make the suggestion to you that there are broadly 3 ways that wealth can be owned. From a pure investment point of view, this is highly simplistic. Now, many people who arrive in Belgium will own investments from other countries, will retain them because they're too busy with their own lives or believe those investments are highly appropriate from a structuring point of view. You may be familiar with livres from France. You may be familiar with ISAs from the UK or premium bonds. These are tax-efficient vehicles in their home country, but once owned by investors overseas, including in Belgium, no longer offer those tax-effective benefits. So broadly, investments are held in one of 3 ways. And what I want to point out first and foremost is that if you own an investment individually, because on a piecemeal basis, your portfolio has grown over the years, and potentially you've paid modest attention to it, then how it's taxed is actually the same if it's on a trading platform, whether that trading platform is a domestic one or an international platform. And increasingly people who are short of time and looking for ease of use and simplicity, and through advice with some advisors in certain countries, will simply use a trading platform to own their individual investments they previously enjoyed. I want to make the suggestion that the third option that's very appropriate to be considered in Belgium is through the offshore bond, indeed notified in law as a branch 23 policy. Now, these colloquially are named by all sorts of brands: international bonds, offshore bonds, private placement life insurance. But ultimately, it's a trading platform that's written in Belgium under insurance law. And these platforms from overseas providers, through certain locations, including our own, born out of Dublin, designed specifically to fit the market need in Belgium, offer a client a certain suite of advantages. So let me just indicate what you may face if you're owning your investments, your stocks and shares, either individually or on a trading platform. Now, Belgium stock exchange tax has been in existence for quite a few years, but this was augmented in 2017 to its application. So if you're owning investments and stocks overseas, on purchase and sale, there will be a requirement for that stock exchange tax to be paid. And also on the sale of certain mutual funds, that charge is appropriate too, up to in excess of 1.3% on that trade. So the more you trade, potentially the more these charges ratchet up. Also, dividends and interests, as we've already discovered, are normally chargeable in most instances at 30%. And don't forget, even if you have accumulation vehicles where you see no income or dividend in your hands directly, because they're being reinvested into the asset itself, that is dividend or interest that needs to be taxed and reported. And also, if you're owning mutual funds because they consolidate wealth and a manager is making those decisions for you, if the investment composition is of a particular type, well, the majority of mutual funds will also be subject to 30% income tax on gains when they're sold. Now, beyond that, the other challenge is there's some very significant and complex reporting. And this happens at 2 levels. Firstly, when a transaction takes place, there's a maximum of 60 days before this has to be reported. And if the wealth is overseas, that's reported by the individual concerned. And of course, if you have even a single asset and it's spinning off a dividend 4 times a year, and if it's sometimes being reinvested, or maybe you're making an encashment to take a withdrawal, all these things become individually reportable in a manner that were otherwise perhaps not imagined. And the mere holding of wealth overseas needs to be reported to the bank in Belgium. And that will be the case if those assets overseas are indeed encashed or repurchased. Holding that wealth, the same wealth, so not changing your investment remit through a branch 23 policy, removes the vast majority of those reporting obligations, much of which is done effectively by the life company themselves. So what I'd like to do very briefly is just have a look at the Belgian situation and break down the potential opportunities into what we call non-tax benefits or soft benefits and then tax benefits. So from a non-tax point of view, we've already indicated how relatively simple a branch 23 policy is. Now also there are very low trading costs. As one of the largest insurance companies in the world, when a client trades through our insurance policy, when an asset is purchased, as well as the stock exchange taxes not being applicable, the benefit, of course, is that the purchasing power of our entity is usable. And what you might find or discover is that when you buy assets, the same assets in the market, different charges could apply according to where they are purchased. A good advisor such as Fry's would ensure the lowest cost applicable will be available to you through a structure such as branch 23. The products are always portable. So we look to ensure that we know that where you move, how the product is likely to be taxed. So for example, many British expatriates will contemplate at a later date returning to the UK. And as we'll discover in a moment, a branch 23 product is highly appropriate for someone who's a future tax resident as well. Beyond the scope of the conversation today are estate planning opportunities. All of us will want to indicate, if we can, who will benefit and when, and what are the tax consequences according to local inheritance taxes or inheritance taxes in the country in which we domicile. And of course, bear in mind that if you live in Belgium, you may still have retained your domicile in another country. So taking on board these conversations is highly appropriate. Although we all want the maximum to spend in our retirement, many of us also wish to leave the residuary with the minimum amount of tax that's legally possible to our loved ones. Now, of course, the only certainty in life is that we do pass away, and then we'll generally need probate. And in some countries, probate may take a matter of weeks, and in others, a matter of months or years. And the more complicated your situation, the more countries in which your wealth is situated, the slower this can be, often at a time that you would like this done most expediently for the benefit of your loved ones. One of the additional benefits of a branch 23 policy based out of Ireland is that it can enjoy what's called a policy nomination. So the owner at any time in their life can nominate who shall benefit upon their demise. And they can change that benefit during their lifetime. But that will ensure upon their death, without the need for the time delay of probate and without the costs associated with it, the wealth emanating from that policy can be transferred directly into the person who's been nominated hands. So not only is that quick and without cost, it's also confidential. And I point that out because as a trust and estate practitioner, I recognize today that many more estates are argued over. And that's because wills in most countries are not confidential when they are approved. In other words, a will during your lifetime is normally only known to you and your witnesses. But upon your passing and the will being proved and probate being granted, in the UK, for the sum of £1.50, anyone can ascertain the destination of the benefits that were chosen by the client at outset. So policy nominations have the features of transfer of wealth in a simple, expedient and confidential manner. But the majority of investors look towards the superb tax features associated with branch 23 policies. So not only they defer tax on income and gains of the assets held within policies, when an encashment is made, under the rules appropriate within Belgium today, the withdrawals, either partial or fully, are also tax-free. Now, there is a price to be paid for this, which is insurance premium tax on day one at the fixed price of 2%. But when one compares the trading costs, the stock market taxes, the incomes and dividend taxes, and the capital taxes at up to 30% on many mutual funds, these features are very valuable for many people for this price. And should you be one of the individuals on the call today from the UK, whose future might be there as well, the non-tax benefits apply in the same way. And should you return to the UK, a product like this can be highly suitable. It allows tax deferral and gross roll-up. For those of you from the UK, you'll recognise that the ISA with a maximum subscription per year of £20,000 will give you a similar feature. But beyond that, tax-efficient withdrawals are also available. Not completely tax-free, but up to 5% of the year, the original premium can be drawn per annum in the UK without personal taxation. That goes on for 20 years, or beyond that if your withdrawals are less than 5%. You can also choose to transfer that wealth to loved ones, and the loved ones can take over any chargeable liability in the future, rather than the original owner, which allows for a lot of creativity when there's families with adult children and spouses. And for those people who are from the UK or have retained a UK domicile and will be there in the future, trust can be highly appropriate for helping to mitigate inheritance tax. And branch 23 policies requalified from the UK bring enormous opportunity as well. So I'd like to pretty much conclude and just remind you that many years ago, very famously, we thought that the only certainties in life were death and taxes. But in reality, as Will Rogers said, the only difference between death and taxes is that death doesn't get worse every time Congress meets. And I recognise full well that after the banking collapse in 2008, governments around the world looked very closely at their financial plans. And they were very keen to understand how wealth, investments and income should be taxed. But I'm really pleased to say that insurance as an investment is consistently seen across very many countries around the world as an appropriate and sensible way to plan, and therefore often enjoys certain benefits that would otherwise not necessarily be known. So at that point in time, rather facetiously, I'm going to say easy, isn't it? We've looked at a few of the basic points that are appropriate, but hopefully highlighted some of the absolute advantages of branch 23 for a tax resident of Belgium. So Ed, I wonder if you'd like to join me back in the conversation. I'll hand back over, of course, to you very shortly. And Ed and I are both available for any questions that you'd like to ask.
I'm back. Thank you very much, David. I had a few technical issues while I was away, so I hope that everybody can hear me. And thank you for that walkthrough, not just what Quilter offer, but more generally what an insurance bond can offer. And I think, as you pointed out, this is very much the platform for holding assets. So as we've been describing it, it's a wrapper. So I guess the question that many of those of you that are listening will be asking is, what kind of assets can I hold? And I think the important thing from our point of view, so the Fry Group, is that this is really where the financial planning comes in. And of course, the types of assets you can either move into the policy, or the types of assets that you can buy if you take out a policy are really based upon your own personal objectives, your time frame, and your risk. And if you wish to become a client of the Fry Group, then we will obviously sit down and listen to what you want to achieve. On the risk side, which is very important, we'll carry out a risk profiling exercise, which in turn produces a risk report, which we then use as a basis for any further investment discussions. And we have a range of solutions available, so it's certainly not a one-size-fits-all. We have the advisory portfolios where we work with you to select a range of funds based upon your risk profile. So as the name suggests, we advise you, and then you agree how the money's going to be invested. We've also got discretionary portfolios where the discretion to manage your money is passed to one investment manager, again, based upon your risk. Now, this can either be into a model portfolio of funds, or if you have sufficient capital, into a portfolio of direct shares and other holdings. And lastly, I'm pleased to say that as market leaders in sustainable and responsible investing, we have a full range of solutions that fit into either the advisory or the discretionary options that I've mentioned above. And of course, we'd very much welcome a conversation with you to see if we can assist you in this area. So now what I'd like to do is to move on to questions, between David and I, we'll try to cover as many as possible. The first one that I've got, David, and I think I just need to move my, let me just, technical issue, there we go. So the first question I've got, David, is, and I know the answer to this, but I'll let you answer it. I've got pounds in the UK and euros in Belgium. Can I hold them both in a branch 23?
Yes, Ed. This, of course, is highly important. A branch 23 policy is a wrapper within which you can contain a wide range of investments, but also a very wide range of currencies. And of course, it's important that people have the appropriate currency at the right time. Now, I'm not here to say what that is, but of course, that is appropriate and available within the product. So one can invest in multiple currencies, hold multiple currencies, and then when one wants to withdraw from the bonds, take out their investments in multiple currencies as well. So that's all perfectly feasible.
Okay, so currency flexibility is a big benefit. I mean, the other thing that I would just add is, of course, that you have the portfolio or the policy is going to be nominated in one currency. So my recommendation normally is to have it in the currency that you're eventually going to be spending that money in, because that's the value that's going to be important to you as an individual. So sometimes we have, I mean, if you're retiring in the euro area, that doesn't really make a difference. But if you've got assets in sterling and you're bringing them across to Europe and you're going to retire in Europe, then we recommend that you have euro as the base denomination. And often if people are traveling back to the UK, normally in the relatively near future, then we might suggest that they denominate into sterling. So David, second question I've got here, you said this was a life policy. I've got a question about beneficiaries. Can my children be beneficiaries?
Yeah, absolutely. So as a life policy, it has 1% life cover to qualify as such. And that means upon death of the life assured, who's normally the applicant, 101% of the policy value is paid out. And during the owner's lifetime, they can nominate who will take ownership of the value of that policy when they pass away. And anyone can be chosen as that person who can receive the benefit. Normally, we can't pay out the benefit directly to a minor, and it will have to be retained or passed on to a guardian to hold for them until they reach the age of majority. But it's quite possible to have that minor named as a beneficiary.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Just to the individual who sent in a question about zero coupon bonds and tax, that's very specific to you. So if you don't mind, I'm not going to answer that here, but I will send you a reply by message afterwards. If you'd like to email that question into me, then I'm more than happy to reply to you, but I think that's going to be so specific. I've got another one here. I hold a UK closed-end investment trust quoted on the London Stock Exchange on an online platform in Luxembourg as a Belgian tax resident. How do I go about declaring the tax on bourse? And I will just answer that one. So there is a process, and again, if you get in touch with me directly, we'll be able to direct you to the forms that you need to complete. You might just want to get in touch or look at the platform, because it could well be in Luxembourg that they're doing that reporting on your behalf. But if they're not, there is a process. We are familiar with it. And of course, it's not just about declaring the tax, it's also about paying the tax. And often it's not a lot of tax that has to be paid, but it's the whole process that you have to go through, and then making sure that the operation, the sale or the purchase and the tax that are paid are married up. I also have another question here. I'm interested in impact bond investing. Are you aware of collective investment vehicles for this type of investment? Again, I will answer that because I think it's really aimed at us as the advisor. And I think, as I said in the summary, we're very au fait with sustainable and responsible investing. And as such, again, if you get in charge with us directly, be very happy to go through all the opportunities that are available in that area. I've got another one here. I already hold a portfolio of shares. Can I transfer them, or is it easier to disinvest and bring the cash to then invest into a branch 23? There's a bit of admin involved in that, David. Do you want to take that one?
Yeah, there's no right or wrong there, Ed. I mean, either are perfectly possible. So assets can normally be transferred in, and we provide the appropriate paperwork that Ed will work through with the client to ensure that happens. For some people, that can be advantageous because you're not out of the market. Whereas if you're going to sell something and convert it to cash and then forward that as a cash premium, then of course you might have missed up on the upside or indeed the downside. So either is perfectly possible, and that's a decision for you to make with your advisor. Occasionally mutual funds, the custodians of mutual funds, can be very slow in making transfers out. So what I would say is that it's just working through with Ed and his colleagues if there are any tricky ones to move. But ultimately it's all possible.
Yeah, and I would concur with that. It is possible, but it can get a little bit messy. I think sometimes the ones that we do recommend are the ones that are coming across from the US, because often it can be easier to move those. And you were talking about reduction of US inheritance tax, so moving US stocks into a bond, and particularly if they're linked with employment, it's quite a good thing to do that as what we call an in-specie transfer. But again, we would go through that with you and suggest what we thought was best, whether the transfer or to cash in and to place the cash into the wrapper and then set up either a replicating portfolio or something newer. Could I just also say, for the person who has emailed in to ask that they work for an international organization and they're now going to be subject to Belgian income tax, they want to know about tax returns. Again, I think that's very specific. If you email me separately, in fact, what I might do is I'm just going to go down to, there's our address, our email address there. If you want to send the email in to us, then I can answer that directly for you. And I can also put you in touch with a Belgian tax advisor if you want. Crikey, here's another one. I've got 2 properties which I rent out in the UK, complete an annual self-assessment and pay appropriate tax on the rental income to HMRC. Do I have to declare my UK rental income on my Belgian income tax return? Very specific. I'll answer that one very quickly. The answer is yes. You don't pay tax in Belgium, but it's known as foreign exempt income with progression. So it's foreign income exempt from Belgian tax, but it progresses any other income that you have. So it uses your allowances and progresses your other income up into higher brackets. And interestingly, and I don't know how this goes down under European law, although the UK has just left Europe, but even if you had a property in France or Germany, even if it was empty, you have to declare a notional rental value on your Belgian tax return. Again, if you want more information about that, if you email in separately to us, then we can put you in touch with a tax advisor who can help you through that. Right, another one for US citizen: is the branch 23 investment considered to be a piece of the last one? David, do you want to answer this one?
Yeah, so we rarely give advice to US citizens. In fact, we don't give advice. But my view would be that a branch 23 policy probably would be considered as a passive foreign investment company. And for most people, that would be, let's say, off-putting. I'm going to flip that question just a little bit to throw in a little piece of extra information. It's not terribly well known that if you're an investor in the US, and you own US shares, and as I've said, that occupies over half of the worldwide market, or US mutual funds, and you're not a US citizen, you actually will have a potential US estate duty liability when you pass away. So someone who's not from the US but owns US wealth, either directly or through a trading platform, even if it's a non-US trading platform, that's an asset of theirs for US estate duty. Now, US estate duty is payable up to the rate of 40%. And if you're not a US citizen, then your only exemption in the US is 60,000 US dollars. So this is an area where many people's estates are caught out. And that's also because the US has very few double tax treaties for death duties with other countries around the world. Now, owning wealth through a branch 23 product, if you're not a US citizen, means instead of you owning the US wealth, you're owning an overseas life assurance policy based in Dublin. So when you pass away, though the only assets within it might be US assets, you're not considered to have a US estate. So thank you for the person asking the question. That's really reminded me of an additional feature of branch 23 that can be very valuable for investors who diversify and use US wealth.
Yeah, and I would just add that even though the branch 23 might not be suitable, and I agree with you, I think it would be seen as a PFIC, or certainly some of the assets inside it would be. But we do have solutions for US national citizens, taxpayers. So if you'd like to get in touch with us, because actually we've had another question, do I understand correctly, investments you're discussing today would not be suitable for US citizens. We do have solutions. So please don't run away and think that we can't help you, because we most certainly can. And some of those solutions actually, which can actually hold insurance products. So there's some pension type contracts based in other European countries, specifically Malta, where you can hold an insurance product. So please do get back in touch with us so we can discuss this. Happy to take one more. So can I have a policy in joint names along with my partner? Very straightforward answer, David, from you.
You can. There can be implications for doing so. Normally, for most people, it's better in single lives. But what I'm going to say, it's important to take advice on this subject because it's very explicit the individual situation.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. But I'd also say typically in a Belgian context, we would tend to do joint policy holders with joint lives assured. And again, it depends upon the circumstances, but I would say that 99% of married couples or those that are cohabiting under license and want to have joint assets, we then get a little bit into the marriage laws of Belgium and the community of goods and the separation of goods. But again, that's quite specific. So come and ask us. But typically, it would be joint policy and joint lives assured. Right. I'm just scrolling down all these. Any more properties we've done? Oh, here's another one. Can a branch 23 distribute annual, and I'm going to put in inverted commas there, income? Shall I just answer that?
Yeah.
I think I will. So the answer is yes, it can, but we're very careful not to call it income. It's a regular withdrawal, and we're quite careful to make sure that we don't set it up as a standing order. And for our clients, and we have a lot of them, because many of our clients are retired and want to take these regular withdrawals. And what will happen is that we'll have on our back office system a prompt. We'll then get in touch with the client. We'll sell down an asset. That asset will go into cash. And then the client will submit a surrender application. And all of this can now be done online. And actually, I don't think one of the things that you mentioned, David, was the fabulous online facilities that are available through Quilters. But we can do all of this online. And the money's paid out by the insurance company as a withdrawal into your nominated bank account, which can be in Belgium or anywhere else around the world if you're retiring in France or Italy or anywhere else. And it works well. It has been looked at by the Belgian fiscal authorities, and it's absolutely pucker, it works. There is no tax. So I hope that gives you some confidence. Just very lastly, no, I think that's it. So I think all that leaves me to do is to ask you, please, and actually it was on the previous slide, please do follow us on LinkedIn. What we'll also do is send you an email. We'd love you to opt into our mailings. We can't just randomly spam you these days. So if you're not already, please do opt in. You'll receive regular updates. We don't send out too many, and you get news and events. And we've got quite a few interesting webinars to follow up in Q3 and Q4, not necessarily specific to Belgium. This will be done by the group. We've done quite a few over the last 6 months, and they really are top quality. Here's the compliance slide. For those of you without a microscope, I would stress that this is an informative presentation and not advice. And the Fry Group Belgium, we're fully regulated in Belgium by the Financial Services and Markets Authority, the FSMA. So all that leaves me to do is to thank David for today's presentation, to thank you all for attending and staying to the bitter end. And I hope that either myself or my colleagues, Katie, Sean, or Amanda, can help you in the future, and that we will welcome some of you as clients of the Fry Group. So what I'd like to do is wish you all a fantastic rest of the summer, and please do stay safe. And thanks again for your time.